Let's bring in Kellyanne Conway, former counselor to the president. Good morning, Kellyanne.
Good morning.
Good morning. So they're counting all of these ballots. We have the lawsuits. What's the president's path forward?
The president's path forward is for North Carolina and Georgia to hold and be called for him. That's 31. You add Pennsylvania there, where he is way ahead, and we're patiently waiting for all the legal votes to be counted there. That's 51. Arizona is going the other way. I know you're one of the only places in the world that called it for him. Many of the other networks and anti-Trump papers haven't called it yet. So I know the campaign feels very good about at least the Maricopa results overnight, that the president hit his marks. He needed roughly about 57% of those ballots to go his way, and indeed they have. And then, of course, Nevada is still outstanding. Alaska is still outstanding, 3 votes. So that puts the president over the top. Let me also say that we spent 3 years. They spent 3 years investigating the president, impeaching the president. We can't wait 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks to get a result in our great, sturdy democracy as to whom the next president will be. I mean, what is the rush all of a sudden? I think the rush is there was no blue wave. There was no early night. There was no Democratic progressive realignment. In fact, the Democratic down-ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures as well. The Democrats did not flip a single state legislature. And in fact, the Republicans flipped the House and Senate, for example, in a place like New Hampshire, where they have a Republican governor. So that's solid now. They did a similar thing in Montana, held on to the governorship. The governor there lost the Senate race. We held that. And of course, the Democratic governor, and now we have the legislature as well. So, you know, the 7 races that were either the 7 races that flipped that are brand new Republican pickups, as Leader McCarthy noted, as I tweeted yesterday, as others are saying, those were all carried by a woman, a minority candidate, and or a veteran. And that means the candidate recruitment the Republicans were doing, their message, that really carried them forward, and nobody was paying attention to that. Instead, all these phony national polls were shoved down our throats. Biden is up by 10, Biden's up by 12, Biden's up by 15. Do you know, when I took over as campaign manager in 2016, we did 0, let me repeat the number, 0 national polls from that point forward. They're not relevant. They tell you trends, but they don't dig into the electoral college map. Electability, I can tell you whether you can or can't win, is outdated. That's the way Republicans lost the presidential races for years. Electoral college is how you do or don't win. And that's why these state polls were so much more important. Do you know where Susan Collins won re-election? But even the state polls, Kellyanne, in Maine, that's right, they were wrong. But remember, a lot of them are media polls and academic polls. So we need to hold the same people to account. Not a single poll in the state of Maine showed Susan Collins ahead. She won by almost 9 points. It wasn't a squeaker.
Joni Ernst, a very similar situation. Just in case you think that Kellyanne is overstating it, we got our VCRs out, we put them together, we got these cords, and we taped it, and we put it into a montage. Watch.
President Trump is dragging down Republican senators with him.
For parties, sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. And this year, it looks like Republicans are the bug.
This could be the year where Texas goes blue.
More likely, as we sit tonight, that Joe Biden wins a landslide.
If we see in those final polls the type of lead that Joe Biden has now, the polls are not going to be wrong.
Yeah, wrong. New York Post is from their editorial. No matter who wins the polls, the pundits, the press were all wrong, wrong, wrong. Kellyanne, you did this for a living. And I always would say, you call the campaign, they go, our internals say this. But they're selling the public on something else. That's malpractice.
Now, I want to say something, too. The reason that a lot of reporters will not cover internal polls of any candidates, let alone a presidential candidate, they'll say, well, you're biased. You want your candidate to win. No, you can't be biased internally because you're deploying resources. And the greatest resources we have, Donald Trump and Mike Pence, you're putting the money. You're deciding where to run the ads. You're deciding where to beef up the ground game. Yep. And so you don't want disingenuous polls. But here's the deal. I said to your Chris Wallace on January 29th, 2017, I was on his Fox News Sunday show. We had only been here less than 10 days. And he asked me a question about it. I said, Chris, not a single person has lost his or her job who was chronically wrong about this election in 2016. I predict it's not going to happen again after 2020. Nobody cares and nobody wants to cure this problem. If this were a real business, the C-suite would be cleaned out, the shareholders would revolt, and the consumers would vote with their feet. They'd go elsewhere. But these polls weren't scientific evidentiary measures of what was going to happen. They're wishful thinking. And here's one thing. I was a pollster for decades. And I used to give paid speeches about polls too and advise clients. One thing we all have to remember is it's becoming increasingly difficult to sample enough people in each cohort by race, by gender, by age, by geography, by party affiliation. And you have to wait, WAIT, to finish a poll over a series of days for it to be accurate. But what's happening is they're weighting, WEIGHT, their results. So they're getting a small number of responses in an individual cohort and extrapolating that. But honestly, where is the consequence? They are so chronically wrong. There were people on TV last night who predicted a blue wave, an early night, a rebuke of the Trump agenda. The Trump agenda won up and down the ballot. We're holding the Senate. We picked up in the House, the state legislatures. Pelosi's got a big problem now because the squad that doesn't do squat except be
They're going to make a run at her. They're going to make a run at her.
They're going to make a run at her. They did last time. So they're definitely going to make a run at her because all we hear about is she's powerful. Look at her mask. It matches her dress again. She didn't do anything to build her coalition, her majority. But Leader McCarthy and the Trump agenda did. And it was a real rebuke. I also just want to read you this. It's on my Twitter thing, but let me just quickly. In South Carolina, Jamie Harrison, African-American man, they spent $109 million. Lindsey Graham beat him. Amy McGrath, $90 million to lose by Mitch McConnell by big double digits. Sarah Gideon, the aforementioned Maine, she lost to Susan Collins, but not before $69.5 million was spent. Mary Hager in Texas lost to John Cornyn, $24 million spent. Those are female candidates, minority candidates the Democrats recruit to try to unseat Republican candidates. They lost every single time they did it. We picked up at least one female U.S. senator. Are you hearing about that? No. And by the way, speaking of female U.S. senators, where's Kamala Harris? Joe Biden literally yesterday had her off to the side, silenced, as he was saying, the voters will not be silenced. I don't want the voters to be silenced, but why is your vice presidential running mate about to make history silenced?
You know, Kellyanne, you were talking about all the money that the Democrat side put up against the Republicans, and yet the Republicans prevailed. You're leaving out Michael Bloomberg. He spent like $100 million to make sure that Donald Trump did not win Florida, and Donald Trump won Florida in such a big way. But going back to your earlier topic about pollstering, you know, we had this conversation 4 years ago about the Trump voter that was hard to quantify because they didn't want to say, yeah, I'm for Donald Trump. Now they refer to it as the shy Trump voter. That is a real thing, but those big mainstream media polls simply either chose not to quantify it or couldn't figure it out, because it is tough. When somebody is lying to you or being evasive, it's hard to tell what they really think.
Well, sure. And look, there are two things going on. I discussed this directly with the president last week, actually. There is the there is the shy, undercover Trump voter that I first talked about in July of 2016 to international ridicule and derision. And then CNN wrote a big article about this, that we were going to bank on this hidden Trump voter you couldn't see in polls in August of 2016. And here's the deal. You had the shy Trump voters who just don't want every night to feel like Thanksgiving with the in-laws. They're so tired of arguing with people in their circle of life. And guess what? Winning finishes all these sentences. You don't have to get out there and argue. Your guy won last time. You just want him to win this time. But there's also the not so shy and hidden Trump voter this time. Look at the rallies.
Flotilla.
Look at the day of turnout. So they were proud to be out there. But here's the deal. We should be concerned about one thing. We should be concerned, sure, that the mainstream media, 92% against Donald Trump, the coverage 95%, but they're the ones doing the polling. They have unlimited resources to do polling that they then shove in front of you as facts. What concerns me is not that they don't like the president, they voted against the president, we already knew that. What concerns me is that they didn't take the last 4 years to learn the Trump zeitgeist, to learn what motivates America to support him.
But it's not over. It's not over at all. And I will say this.
It's not over at all.
And even though 538 is hardly the pollster unit we already thought it is, this has just come across. Nate Silver says Arizona should be taken down from the column. He says, I don't know. I guess if Arizona, you forced me to make a pick, I sure as heck don't know. I guess it would be in the Biden column. But he says it's not a sure thing anymore. I know we ruled it one way. We believe it. But for him to move it out is, if you're a high-five and you're a Biden fan, maybe you're dancing before you get in the end zone.
Well, I hope that the Biden campaign agrees with the Trump campaign that every legal vote should be counted, including in Arizona. And our grievance, our beef with Fox News having called Arizona early is not that eventually maybe Biden wins it or Trump wins it. It's that it's 3 hours behind the East Coast for a lot of these states where the numbers were clearly in had not been called yet. Other outlets have not called it for a very simple reason. Arizona has a very rich tradition of mail-in balloting. I've worked on congressional races. I remember representing, I won't name him, a candidate years ago in a primary battle. And I said, you're going to do great in the day of voting, but they didn't have much of before I got involved, they didn't have much of a plan for the early vote. And he lost. This happens because the mail-in ballot is so strong. It particularly was strong this year.
And they know how to do it.
So calling it, that's right, they know how to do it. But calling it too early, again, I'm just going to repeat what I said at the beginning. Why are we in such a rush? They spent 3 years investigating and impeaching the president and found absolutely nothing. He's still the president. And why are we in such a rush to finish this election prematurely? Let's be patient. Let's take a deep breath. Let's count every legal vote. I think it's a time to be methodical and not emotional.
Right.
This is what I think. And I think we should be exposing some of the people who are in charge of this, who have a history of being
put it this
wildly
way. If you were a
anti-Trump.
pollster and you're on a pregame show and you're supposed to highlight and preview a game, you would have been fired on ESPN and Fox Sports. They would not take you more than 2 weeks.
That's right.
But just
That's
real
right.
quick, that was a decision desk decision, and we stand by the Arizona decision, but that's done by the decision desk.
Right, and I've seen it be explained, but not very well. But look, I just want to say this to you, that it doesn't really matter because Arizona is going to count its votes. Pennsylvania is going to count its votes. Everywhere is going to count its votes. Alaska is also still outstanding. That will go the president's way. And you mentioned Michael Bloomberg. I have to give an early award for 2020. I think the most brilliant political people in 2020 were clearly the consultants getting a cut of the Michael Bloomberg fortune. $1 billion on this Don Quixote-like presidential run. They got a cut of that. And then $100 million on trying to turn Texas, Ohio, and Florida blue, all of which stayed red.
Failed.
They tried to do that in
not a
South
single
Carolina. When they tried to do that in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, everyone in South Carolina said, what are you bringing your Hollywood dollars into our state? You can't tell us how to vote or what to do for our state.
That's right. They don't like it. And this is already, that's right. This is a rebuke of the elites, I think, in the establishment, telling people how to think, what to do, and what your value of a human being is based on your vote.
Gotcha.
But wishful thinking doesn't win. The people spoke again. Let's see what happens. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.